is a great space. I'm really excited. It's absolutely beautiful. So, I'm in the middle of the endless book tour. And you know, I woke up in a hotel in Minneapolis last week and looked out the window and the giant flashing sign said 1 degree. I thought that was pretty stingy, you know? One degree. Anyway, it's so much fun to be here. I thought what I would do tonight is tell you about my new book and give you a tiny taste of it and then maybe read you a short story because this is such a great place. We could get beginning, middle, and end and have a really special night. And besides which, I'm told that there's only one exit. It's already locked. So I've got you. So I have to bring my mother-in-law into this for a minute. So my mother-in-law is a woman who has always regarded me with suspicion, even though I'm a decent guy. I mean, I never caused any trouble or anything else. And she has a dog too. So for years and years, I mean, she would come visit, and I'd come down for breakfast, and she would jump out of her chair and say, "My God, does he sit here?" I said, "It's okay. It's only me." But all these years, she always says to me, "You are so lucky. You're such a lucky guy." I guess I am, but I resented it a little bit because, yeah, but I work hard too, But she's right. I am lucky. And I'm lucky in that whenever I want to find something out about a given subject, I write a novel or a short story. That's just how my brain works. And so I made my escape from LA 18 years ago and became a Santa Barbarian. And during that time, I kept driving up and down through Malibu on the Coast Highway and get up past Oxnard and up in there. And I looked out on the Channel Islands. There they are, these big dun things sitting on the horizon. And I kept wondering, well, what goes on out there? Now I know. I began to read about the islands and then to visit them. And the thing that most motivated me was this material fits in with what I love to write about to begin with, which is us as an animal species, the environment, what we're doing to the earth, where we're going from here, and everything in between. On my refrigerator, held up by 2 magnets, is a little yellowing headline from the Santa Barbara News Press from 6 or 7 years ago. And what it says is, "Eagles arrive as pigs are killed." This is a headline of the newspaper. "Eagles arrive as pigs are killed." And this really got me curious. What is this all about? This is about the fight for the restoration of the national park out there to remove the invasive species so that the native species could thrive, because in the case of one animal, which I'll tell you about in a minute, it was possibly going to become extinct. In the last 10 years, this happened. So here's how the story begins, and all this is based on actual events. I've created characters, of course, and dramatized it for my own purposes. But it begins with 2001, the Anacapa Island, which I'm sure many of you know. This was infested with rats. The rats had got there in 1853 in the wreck of the Winfield Scott paddle wheel steamer. This is a boat coming down from San Francisco regularly to Panama. No Panama Canal yet. People would trek across there, take an Allied steamship to New York and the East Coast and whatnot. A lot of them were 49ers, guys who'd been out in the field getting their gold. So it was a foggy day. It's always foggy in the Santa Barbara Channel. And the captain of the ship ran aground on Anacapa Island. No one was killed, but they had to spend a week out there waiting for rescue. One guy shot a seal so they'd have something to eat. Can you imagine how delicious a seal must be, actually? The gold was all recovered. Everybody was fine. But the rats aboard the ship got onto the island. And they were living there ever since until the year 2001, at which point the Park Service decided they must be eradicated. Why? Well, because they were killing the ground nesting birds, seabirds, which evolved without predators. So they were eating the eggs and the chicks of these birds, and some of them are rather rare, and they only nest on these islands, the Cassin's auklet, the pigeon guillemot, there are many of them. So, the Park Service decided what to do about this is to take a helicopter and bomb it with rat poison. Yes, rotofacum, the very stuff in decon, the very stuff all of you who have had heart attacks are probably taking right now to thin your blood. There was a protest against this. Animal rights activists who feel that no animal should be killed. All lives are equally valuable. And so, in real life and in my novel too, a guy and his confederate took their own boat out there with huge backpacks full of vitamin K, the antidote to rotofacum, and spread it all over the island along with some kibble, to feed the rats. They were arrested for interfering with a Park Service operation and further for feeding wildlife in a national park without a permit. That's pretty absurd. On the other hand, I created a character based on what happened here. His name is Dave LaJoy, and he lives in Santa Barbara. He wears his hair in dreadlocks. He's 42 years old. He is fairly successful. He had a string of audio stores, and he is an animal rights activist. And he is the guy in my telling who goes and throws this vitamin K out there. He has an antagonist. The other major character in the book is named Alma Boyd Takasui, and she works for the Park Service. She's a PhD, she's a biologist. And she is in charge of this operation, and worse, she's in charge of having to explain to the public what's going on. She is just like him. She is a vegetarian too. She doesn't want to kill any animals. She's a biologist. She wants to preserve the environment. But here's where they differ. She feels that these invasive species, like the rats, should be removed to spare the species that are endemic to these islands. And so some killing has to be done. When the killing's done, some has to be done in order to preserve these species. All right, great. Now it gets much more complicated and slightly ridiculous too, because the second portion of the book takes us to Santa Cruz Island, the big one. This island is right off Santa Barbara. It's a big dun one you see sitting there. It's 22 miles out. It's more than 4 times bigger than Manhattan, and nobody lives there because it's now 90% is Nature Conservancy, 10% is the Park Service. Eventually, it will all be part of the national park. I now have to tell you about the problem there. It's this concatenation of events that Samuel Beckett would have enjoyed. It's so absurd, but it actually is true. So, in Santa Monica Bay during World War II, a chemical company dumped DDT into the bay. And I'm sure a lot of you know about this. That DDT worked its way up the food chain, and the bald eagles, which are mainly piscivorous, ate this, and their shells would no longer hatch. They died off. No more bald eagles on the Channel Islands, all the Channel Islands, including the northern ones, which I'm writing about. In their absence, in flew golden eagles, which mainly prey on animals on the ground from the coast. All right, that's no big deal, golden eagles. What attracted them, though, were the delicious piglets. How did the pigs get on Santa Cruz? Santa Cruz, all the islands were used as sheep ranches at one time, individually owned. And, the sheep ranchers, they had pigs. The pigs got loose. Again, this is 150 years ago, and became wild pigs, the boars, and so on, living out there. All right, well, the sheep. Now, the sheep are the real problem here. As you well know, sheep eat everything right down to the dirt. So the first thing that the Nature Conservancy and Park Service did was to remove the sheep. And if you go out there, by the way, I'm sure many of you have been out, the Park Service part is at Prisoners, and you go out at Scorpion Landing. You go out there, and if you take the boat to Prisoners, where the Nature Conservancy is, you see this demarcation of the vegetation, because Nature Conservancy removed the sheep 15 years before the Park Service did, and so it's had a chance to grow back, and it's really a dramatic difference. At any rate, The sheep could be removed. They could be just taken back to shore and sold for whatever purpose. I suppose a lot of them wound up being lamb chops. I don't know. But the sheep could be removed humanely. The pigs couldn't, though, because they'd been a separate, discrete species. Who knows what kind of bacteria or virus or diseases they might have evolved, and God forbid they should come back here and destroy our pork industry. So the pigs had to be removed for two reasons. One, like the sheep, they were changing the ecology of the island. They were digging, they dig up things all the time to eat tubers. This gives invasive plants a chance to establish themselves. And further, they're eating the acorns. So all the trees on the island were remnant trees dying, and there were no saplings. This changes the entire ecology of the island. You need these trees on the ridges to catch the mist, to give it water. Now the pigs had to go. And in my telling, Dave LaJoie protests this very actively, and Alma is the one in charge of this. In real life and in the novel, here's what happened. Why did the pigs have to go? Well, the golden eagles were preying on the pigs until the sheep were gone. Once the sheep were gone, the invasive fennel, anise, grew up into these giant thickets the size of this room, 20 feet high. And the delicious piglets, of course, hid in the thickets. Now you have hungry golden eagles. What are they going to eat? Now we get to the poster animal of the whole story, the Channel Islands fox. It's a dwarf variety found nowhere else on Earth. Because of the principles of island biogeography, this animal's been there for 16,000 years in a limited environment, and it became progressively smaller. It's the size of a house cat. Not your house cats, which are overfed, bloated, fat things, but a small, lithe house cat, 4 to 6 pounds. And they look like Walt Disney created them. They're these cute little things and so on. Well, in the absence of the pigs now, the Goldens began to eat the little foxes. There were 1,500 of them in the late 90s, and by the time the biologists figured out what the problem was, they were down to just a couple hundred. So here was the solution. They hired a New Zealand concern to come, for a mere $7 million, by the way, and shoot every single pig on the island and leave it there to die. Leave it dead on the island to rot. 5,500 of them, as it turned out. Meanwhile, they trapped the Goldens, took them to the Sierras and let them go, and reintroduced the bald eagle from Alaska. My wife and I were present for the release of the first 2 bald eagle chicks born on those islands since the 1940s. And we're talking about a chick that's this big with claws the size of my hands. And we're very happy about all of this. But other people weren't so happy, because the question here is, who has the right to manipulate all these animals, not to mention eat them? And there are people who feel that all life is sacred, and others who, kind of blissfully go on, as we're the top animal on the planet, to manipulate these animals as we like. I have a friend in Manhattan. He's never left New York. We even call him Mr. Manhattan. He's this suave guy, He's not that good looking, really, but he's a foodie, he's a gourmet. When the restaurants close 2 in the morning, all he has to do is lift an eyebrow and cabs come screeching to a halt out front, and so on and so on. His entire relationship to the animal kingdom is how it tastes and how it looks on the plate and what the chef is presenting it like, So there are different poles in this scenario that I've created. In opposition. And so we have a battle between Dave LaJoie and Alma, and it gets complicated. So I would like to just give you a little taste of this, and then, as I say, because it's so much fun tonight, read you a short story. And I'd like to just give you 2 pages of Dave LaJoie. He's one of these guys who is just really angry, just angry all the time. He has to take high blood pressure medicine, and he's supposed to take various mood tranquilizers and so on, but he doesn't want to take that. He's just really, really angry all the time. And in the scene that precedes it, he has interrupted Alma when she's giving a speech to the audience to tell them what they're going to do with regard to bombing the rats on Anacapa. And he has interrupted her speech rather rudely and caused a ruckus. And now it's the next morning. And he is sitting in his diner where he goes for breakfast every morning. And this is a guy who really, he's so angry, he can't even eat breakfast, without just getting really nuts. Okay, so. If there's one thing he hates, it's a runny yolk. And toast, so dry it shatters like a cracker before you can spread the butter. And rain, he hates the rain too. 3 days of it now. Making a mess of the streets and keeping shoppers out of the stores. Pathetic numbers, absolutely pathetic in all 4 units. And with the Christmas season coming on, no less. Depressing people, drooling like bilge down the plate glass window at the Cactus Cafe where he eats breakfast 5 days a week, and they still can't figure out what over fucking easy means. His dried out toast is cold. The coffee tastes like aluminum foil, and it's cold too, or lukewarm at best. And the newspaper has one stingy little article about what went down at the museum last night, tucked away in the community events roundup for Tuesday, November 20, 2001. The date in bolder type than the headline, as if to indicate that everything included beneath it would be just as mind-numbing and inconsequential as it had been the day before and the day before that. Under the headline, Protest at Museum Lecture, there's a scant 2 paragraphs that don't begin to get at the issue. And worse, don't even mention him or the FPA by name, let alone set out the counter-arguments he'd thrown right in the face of that condescending little bitch from the Park Service who was fooling nobody with her gray-eyed squint and her all-black outfit as if she were going to a funeral or a goth club or something, and all her tricked-up images of the cute little animals that just have to be saved in the face of this sudden onslaught by all these other ugly little animals made uglier by somebody's Photoshop manipulations, as if the birds wouldn't last another week when 150 years had gone by in complete harmony and natural balance with all the other birds and plants and the rats too. Something Alma Boyd Takasui, PhD, didn't bother to mention. Suddenly, he's jerking his head around. And there's Marta, fat Marta with her 2-ton tits and big pregnant belly that isn't pregnant at all, only just fat, bending over some other guy's table by the door, flirting with him for Christ's sake. And before he can think, he shouts out her name, surprising himself by the violence of his voice. Everybody in the place, and there must be 30 of them, half he recognizes and half not, looks up in unison, as if they were all named Marta. And what does he think about that? He thinks, fuck you, collectively. He thinks he might have to find another goddamn diner where they know the difference between... And here she is, her face drawn down around a mouth shrunk to the size of a keyhole beneath the flabby cheeks, coming to him as swiftly as her 2 small feet can carry her, trying to act as if she cares. Is everything okay, she asks, before she's halfway to him, so everybody can hear her doing her job, even Francisco, the cook, who's giving him a hooded look from behind the grill, a cigarette in one hand, spatula in the other. No, he says, still too loud. And they're still looking, all of them, because they're a bunch of sad-ass, pathetic voyeurs with nothing better to do, and fuck them, really, fuck them. No, everything isn't okay. Because I come in here every day, don't I? And you people still don't know what over easy means? Shit, if I wanted sunny side up, if I wanted a runny yolk, that's what I would have ordered. She's already reaching for the plate, already apologizing. Sorry, sir, I'll have the cook, and all the rest of the mollifying, meaningless little phrases she dispenses 100 times a day because the cook's a moron, and to call her incompetent would be a compliment. But he can't help saying, snarling, and why is he snarling? Take it away and do it right, or don't do it at all. And to the retreating twin hummocks of her butt. And the toast is like that shit they give babies. What do you call it, Zwieback? And I don't want Zwieback. I want toast. She's at the swinging door to the kitchen now, making a show of upending the plate in the trash, while Francisco shrinks into the Aztecan nullity of his face, and everybody else in the place pretends to take up their conversations where they left off. And he can't help adding, his voice lower now, the rage all steamed out of him, though the heat's still up high. Simple toast, is that too much to ask? So that's your introduction to Dave. He just has anger management problems, and so he will prove to be quite an adversary for poor Alma. There's another little thing that went on between them before this happened. When she had first moved to town, living in a little village part of Santa Barbara, she had a date with him. They had just met. They both love animals. They're vegetarians, et cetera, and they'd met at a folk club. His girlfriend's a folk singer. She loves folk music. They met at a club, and they're both kind of attractive. And he said, "Let's go on a date." And she said, "Okay, but we have to do it at a restaurant that I know," because she wasn't sure about the guy yet. So she had a little restaurant that she went to, a very nice Italian restaurant where they knew her well. She'd go sometimes by herself, sometimes with a girlfriend to eat there. So they went on a date. And Dave came in, and he started to make a ruckus because they didn't have a sommelier, just a waiter. And so he ordered the most expensive bottle of wine, and the ritual of the cork and the sniffing of the wine and so on and so on. And he took one taste, spat it out, and said, "Take this rot gut away from me." All right? He ordered the second most expensive bottle of wine. Same scenario happened. At that point, Alma, humiliated, got up and walked out. And so, I have to say that I took this story from an actual experience that a friend of mine had. She's a lawyer. She got a new job in a little town in the Bay Area, and she met a guy online who also claimed to be a lawyer. And so she felt, "We'll have a date at my restaurant." And this same exact thing happened. So I've now given it to Dave and Alma instead. And of course, this is the beauty of doing what I do. It's a true test of your friends and their friendship, because all my friends know that their deepest sexual secrets will be revealed to the world for my profit. And they're my friends anyhow. All right, so I want to read you a short story because we're just having too much fun. Suffice it to say that the book has to do with island biogeography and what really happened on the islands, and it plays out, I think, in a satisfying way. My mother loved it, by the way. She loved this book. I think I'd like to read you a story that might take about a half an hour to read. Can we handle that, or should I read a shorter one? Ted, what's the time limit here?
It's your night.
Oh, it is my night. Okay, and the doors are locked, right? Oh, hell, maybe I'll read the entire novel except for the last paragraph. What do you think? So, last year I had a book of stories called Wild Child, which, is, the novella is after the Enfant Sauvage that they discovered in France in Napoleonic era. And in it is a story called The Lie, which I love to read to audiences. Have you heard The Lie yet? How many have heard The Lie? All right? Okay. Should I read it or something different? All right, I'll present you The Lie. It's a really good one to read, and I'll just set it up only in this way. Guy doesn't want to go to work. He tells a little lie. The lie. I'd used up all my sick days and the 2 personal days they allowed us. But when the alarm went off and the baby started squalling and my wife threw back the covers to totter off to the bathroom in a hobbled 2-legged trot, I knew I wasn't going into work. It was as if a black shroud had been pulled over my face. My eyes were open, but I couldn't see. Or no, I could see. The pulsing LED display on the clock radio, the mounds of laundry and discarded clothes humped round the room like the tumuli of the dead, a hard-driving rain drooling down the dark vacancy of the window. But everything seemed to have a film over it, a world coated in Vaseline. The baby let out a series of scaled-back cries. The toilet flushed. The overhead light flicked on. Clover was back in the room, the baby flung over one shoulder. She was wearing an old Cramps t-shirt she liked to sleep in and nothing else. I might have found this sexy to one degree or another, but for the fact that I wasn't at my best in the morning, and I'd seen her naked save for one rock and roll memento t-shirt for something like 1,000 consecutive mornings now. It's 6:15, she said. I said nothing. My eyes eased shut. I heard her at the closet, and in the dream that crashed down on me in that instant, she metamorphosed from a rippling human female with a baby slung over one shoulder to a great shining bird springing from the brink of the precipice to sailing on great shining wings out into the void. I woke to the baby on the bed beside me. You change her, my wife said. You feed her. I'm late as it is. We'd had some people over the night before, friends from the pre-baby days, and we'd made margaritas in the blender, watched a movie, and stayed up late talking about nothing and everything. Clover had shown off the baby, Xana. We named her Xana after a character in one of the movies I'd edited, or actually logged, and I'd felt a rush of pride. Here was this baby, perfect in every way, beautiful because her parents were beautiful, and that was all right. Tank, he'd been in my band, co-leader, co-founder, and we'd written songs together till that went sour. Said she was fat enough to eat, and I'd said, yeah, just let me fire up the Barbie. And Clover had given me her little drawn-down pout of disgust because I was being juvenile. We stayed up till the rain started. I poured one more round of margaritas, and then Tank's girlfriend opened her maw in a yawn that could have sucked in the whole condo and the street out front, too, and the party broke up. Now I was in bed, and the baby was crawling up my right leg, giving off a powerful reek of shit. The clock inched forward. Clover got dressed, put on her makeup, and took her coffee mug out to the car and was gone. There was nothing heroic in what I did next, dealing with the baby in my own car and the stalled nose-to-tail traffic that made the 3 miles to the babysitters seem like a trek across the wastelands of the earth. It was just life, that was all. But as soon as I handed Xana over to Violetta at the door of her apartment that threw up a wall of cooking smells, tearful Telemundo dialogue, and the diachronic yapping of her 4 chihuahuas, I slammed myself into the car and called in sick. Or no, not sick. My sick days were gone, I reminded myself. And my personal days, too. My boss picked up the phone. Iron House Productions, he said, his voice digging out from under the R's. He had trouble with R's. He had trouble with English, for that matter. Hello, Radko? Yes, it is he. Who is it now? It's me, Lonnie. Let me guess, you are sick. Radko was one of that select group of hard chargers in the production business who kept morning hours, and that was good for me because with Clover working days and going to law school at night, and the baby, of course, my own availability was restricted to the daylight hours when Violetta's own children were at school and her husband was at work operating one of the cranes that lifted the beams to build the city out till there was nothing green left for 50 miles around. But Radko had promised me career advancement, moving up from logging footage to actual editing, and that hadn't happened. On this particular morning, as on too many mornings in the past, I felt I just couldn't face the editing bay, the computer screen, the eternal idiocy of the dialogue repeated over and over through take after take, frame after frame. No, Jim, stop. Jim, stop. No, Jim, stop. I used to be in a band. I had a college degree. I was no drudge. Before I could think, it was out. It's the baby, I said. There was a silence I might have read too much into. Then Radko, dicing the interrogative. What baby? Mine, my baby. Remember the pictures Clover emailed everybody? My brain was doing cartwheels. 9 months ago when she was born? Another long pause. Finally he said, yes. Well, she's sick, very sick, with a fever and all that. We don't know what's wrong with her. The wheel of internal calculus spun one more time, and I made another leap, the one that would prove to be fatal. I'm at the hospital now. As soon as I hung up, I felt as if I'd been pumped full of helium, giddy with it, rising right out of my seat. But then the slow seepage of guilt, dread, and fear started in, drip by drip like bile drained out of a liver gone bad. A delivery truck pulled up next to me. Rain beat at the windshield. 2 cholos rolled out of the apartment next to Violetta's, the green block tattoos they worn like collars glistening in the light trapped beneath the clouds. I had the whole day in front of me. I could do anything, go anywhere. An hour ago, it was sleep I wanted. Now it was something else. A pulse of excitement, the promise of illicit thrills started up in my stomach. I drove down Ventura Boulevard in the opposite direction from the bulk of the commuters. They were stalled at the lights, a single driver in every car, the cars themselves like steel shells they'd extruded to contain their resentments. They were going to work. I wasn't. After a mile or so, I came to a diner where I sometimes took Clover for breakfast on Sundays, especially if we'd been out the night before, and on an impulse, I pulled into the lot. I bought a newspaper from the machine out front, and then I took a copy of the free paper, too, and went on in and settled into a seat by the window. The smell of fresh coffee and home fries made me realize how hungry I was, and I ordered the kind of breakfast I used to have in college after a night of excess. Salt, sugar, and grease in quantity, just to open my pores. While I ate, I made my way through both newspapers, item by item, because this was luxurious, kingly, the tables clean, the place brightly lit and warm to the point of steaming with the bustle of the waitresses and the rain at the windows like a plague. Nobody said a word to me. Nobody even looked at me, but for my waitress. She was middle-aged, weighted to her uniform, her hair dyed shoe-polished black. "More coffee?" she asked for the third or fourth time. "No hurry, no rush, just an invitation." I glanced at my watch and couldn't believe it was only 9:30. That was the thing about taking a day off, the way the time reconfigured itself, and how you couldn't help comparing any given moment with what you'd be doing at work. At work, I wouldn't have eaten yet, wouldn't have even reached the coffee break. "Jim, stop! No, no!" And my eyelids would have weighed a ton each. I thought about driving down to the ocean to see what the surf looked like under the pressure of the storm. Not that I was thinking about surfing. I hadn't been surfing more than a handful of times since the baby was born. It was just that the day was mine, and I wanted to fill it. I wound my way down through Topanga Canyon, the commuter traffic dissipated by now, and I saw how the creek was tearing at the banks, and there were 2 or 3 places there where there was water on the road, and the soft red dough of the mud was like something that had come out of a mold. I walked along the shore till the brim of my baseball cap was sodden and the legs of my jeans as heavy as if they'd just come out of the washing machine. I drove back up the canyon, the rain a little worse, the flooding more obvious and intense, but it wasn't anything really. Not like when the road washes out and you could be driving one minute and the next flailing for your life in a chute of piss-yellow water. There was a movie at 2 I was interested in. But since it was only just past 12 and I couldn't even think about lunch after the lumberjack special I'd had for breakfast, I went back to the condo, parked the car, and walked down the street, getting wetter and wetter and enjoying every minute of it, to a bar I knew. The door swung in on a denseness of purpose. 8 or 9 losers lined up on their bar stools, the smell of cut lime and the sunshine of the rum, a straight shot of Lysol from the toilet and back. It was warm, dark. A college basketball game hovered on the screen above the cash register. "A beer," I said, and then clarified by specifying the brand. I didn't get drunk. That would have been usual, and I didn't want to be usual. But I did have 3 beers before I went to the movie, and after the movie, I felt a vacancy in my lower reaches where lunch should have been, and so I stopped at a fast food place on my way to pick up the baby. They got my order wrong. The employees were glassy-eyed, the manager was nowhere to be seen, and I was 35 minutes late for the baby. Still, I'd had my day, and when I got home, I fed the baby her cream of wheat, opened a beer, put on some music, and began chopping garlic and dicing onions with the notion of concocting a marinara sauce for my wife when she got home. Thoughts of the following morning, of Radko and what he might think or expect, never entered my mind. Not yet. All was well, the baby in her crib, batting at the little figurines in the mobile over her head, the figurines personally welded to the wires by Clover's hippie mother so that there wasn't even the faintest possibility the baby could get them lodged in her throat. The sauce bubbling on the stove, the rain tapping at the windows. I heard Clover's key in the door. And then she was there with her hair kinked out from the rain and smelling like everything I'd ever wanted, and she was asking me how my day had gone, and I said, "Fine, just fine." Then it was morning again, and the same scene played itself out. Clover stutter-stepping to the bathroom, the baby mewling, rain whispering under the soundtrack. And I began to calculate all over again. It was Thursday. 2 more days to the weekend. If I could make it to the weekend, I was sure that by Monday at the latest, whatever was wrong with me, this feeling of anger, hopelessness, turmoil, whatever it was, would be gone. Just a break. I just needed a break, that was all. And Radko. The thought of facing him, of the way he would mold the drooping dog-like folds of his Slavic flesh around the suspicion in his eyes while he told me he was docking me a day's pay and expect me to work overtime to make up for yesterday, was too much to hold on to. Not in bed, not now. But then the toilet flushed, the baby squalled, and the overhead light went on. "It's 6:15, my wife informed me. The evening before, after we dined on my marinara sauce with porcini mushrooms and Italian-style turkey sausage over penne pasta, in the interval before she put the baby down for the night while the dishwasher murmured from the kitchen and we lingered over a second glass of Chianti, she told me she was thinking of changing her name. "What do you mean?" I was more surprised than angry, but I felt the anger come up in me all the same. Like, my name's not good enough for you? Like it was my idea to get married in the first place? She had the baby in her lap. The baby was in high spirits, grinning her toothless baby grin and snatching for the wine glass my wife held just out of reach. You don't have to get nasty about it. It's not your name that's the problem. It's mine. My first name? What's wrong with Clover? I said. And even as I said it, I knew how stupid I sounded. She was Clover. I could close my eyes and she was Clover. Go to Africa and bury myself in mud and she'd still be Clover. Fine, but the name was a hippie affectation of her hippie parents. They were glassblowers with their own gallery. And it was insipid. I knew that down deep. They might as well have named her Dandelion or Fescue. I was thinking of changing it to Chloris. She was watching me, her eyes defiant and insecure at the same time. Legally, I saw her point. She was a legal secretary studying to be a lawyer, and Clover just wouldn't fly on a masthead. But I hated the name, hated the idea. Sounds like something you clean the toilet with, I said. She shot me a look of hate. With bleach in it, I said, with real scrubbing power. But now, though I felt as if I'd been crucified and wanted only to sleep for a week, till Monday, just till Monday, I sat up before she could lift the baby from the crib and drop her on the bed, and in the next moment, I was in the bathroom myself, staring into the mirror. As soon as she left, I was going to call Radko. I would tell him the baby was worse, that we'd been in the hospital all night. And if he asked what was wrong with her, I wasn't going to equivocate, because equivocation, any kind of uncertainty, a tremor in the voice, a tonal shift, play acting, is the surest lie detector. Leukemia, that was what I was going to tell him. The baby has leukemia. This time I waited till I was settled into the booth at the diner and the waitress with the shoe polish hair had got done fussing over me, the light of recognition in her eyes, and a maternal smile creasing her lips. I was a regular 2 days in a row before I called in. And when Radko answered, the deepest, consonant, battering pall of suspicion lodged somewhere between his glottis and adenoids, I couldn't help myself. The baby, I said, holding it a beat. The baby passed. Another beat. The waitress poured. Radko breathed fumes through the receiver. Last night, at 4 a.m., there was nothing they could do. Past? His voice came back at me. What is this past? The baby's dead, I said. She died. And then, in my grief, I broke the connection. I spent the entire day at the movies. The first show was at 11, and I killed time pacing around the parking lot at the mall till they opened the door. And then I was inside in the anonymous dark. Images flashed by on the screen. The sound was amplified to a killing roar. The smell of melted butter hung over everything. When the lights came up, I ducked into the men's room and then slipped into the next theater and the next one after that. I emerged at 4:15, feeling shaky. I told myself I was hungry, that was all. But when I wandered into the food court and saw what they had arrayed there, from chapatis to corn dogs to twice-cooked machaca pretzels and Szechuan eggplant and a sauce of liquid fire, I pushed through the door of a bar instead. It was one of those over-sanitized, too bright, echoing spaces the mall designers, in their wisdom, stuck in the back of their plastic restaurants so that the average moron accompanying his wife on a shopping expedition wouldn't have to kill himself. There was a basketball game on the 3 TVs encircling the bar. The waitresses were teenagers. The bartender had acne. I was the only customer. And I knew I had to pick up the baby. That was a given. That was a fact of life. But I ordered a Captain and Coke just for the smell of it. I was on my second or maybe my third when the place began to fill up. And I realized with a stab of happiness that this must have been an after-work hangout with a prescribed happy hour and some sort of comestibles served up gratis on a heated tray. I'd been wrapped up in my grief. A grief that was all for myself, for the fact that I was 26 years old and going nowhere with a baby to take care of and a wife in the process of flogging a law degree and changing her name because she wasn't who she used to be. And now suddenly, I'd come awake. There were women everywhere. Women my age and older, leaning into the bar with their earrings swaying, lined up at the door, sitting at tables, legs crossed, feet tapping rhythmically to the canned music. Me, I had to pick up the baby. I checked my watch and saw that I was already late for the second day running. But I was hungry all of a sudden, and I thought I'd maybe just have a couple of the taquitos everybody else was shoving into their mouths while I finished my drink. And then I'd get in the car, take the back streets to Violetta's, and be home just before my wife and see if we could get another meal out of the marinara sauce with porcini mushroom and turkey sausage. That was when I felt a pressure on my arm, my left arm, and I lifted my chin to glance over my shoulder into the face of Joel Chinowski, who occupied the bay next to mine at Iron House Productions. At first I didn't recognize him, one of those tricks of the mind, the inebriated mind especially, in which you can't place people out of context, though you know them absolutely. "Joel," I said. He was shaking his head very slowly, as if he were tolling a bell, as if his eyes were the clappers and his skull the ringing shell of it. He had a big head, huge. He was big all around, one of those people who aren't obese or not exactly, but just overgrown to the extent that his clothes seemed inflated, his pants, his jacket, even his socks. He was wearing a tie, the only one of the 76 employees at Iron House to dress in shirt and tie, and it looked like a toy trailing away from his supersized collar. "Oh, shit, man," he said, "shit." "Yeah," I said, and my head was tolling too. I felt caught out. Felt like the very essence he was naming, like shit, that is. "Oh, man, we all heard," he said. He removed his hand from my arm, peered into his palm as if trying to divine what to say next. "It sucks," he said. "It really sucks." And then, though his face never changed expression, he seemed to brighten around the eyes for just an instant. "Hey," he said, "can I buy you a drink? I mean, to drown the sorrow. I mean, that's what you're doing, right? And I don't blame you, not at all. If it was me." He let the thought trail off. There was a girl 2 stools down from me, her hair pulled up in a long, trailing ponytail, and she was wearing a knit jumper over a little black skirt and red leggings. She glanced up at me, 2 green swimming eyes above a pair of lips pursed at the straw of her drink. "Or maybe," Joel said, "you'd rather be alone?" I dragged my eyes away from the girl. "The truth is," I said, I really appreciate it, but I'm meeting Clover at the funeral parlor, to make the arrangements. And I just stopped in for a drink, that's all." "Oh, man." Joel was practically erupting from his shoes, his face drawn down like a curtain and every blood vessel in his eyes gone to waste. "I understand. I understand completely." On the way out the door, I flipped open my cell and dialed Violetta to tell her my wife would be picking up the baby tonight because I was working late. And then I left a message to the same effect at my wife's law office. Then I went looking for a bar where I could find something to eat and maybe one last drink before I went home to lie some more. The next day, Friday, I didn't even bother to call in, but I was feeling marginally better. I had a mild hangover, my head still clanging dully and my stomach shriveled up around a little nugget of nothing, so that after I dropped the baby off, I wasn't able to take anything more than dry toast and black coffee at the diner that was fast becoming my second home. And yet the force of the lie, the enormity of it, was behind me. And here, outside the windows, the sun was shining for the first time in days. I'd been listening to the surf report in the car on the way over. We were getting 6-foot swells as a result of the storm. And after breakfast, I dug out my wetsuit and my board and let the Pacific roll on under me until I forgot everything in the world but the taste of salt and the smell of the breeze and the weird, strangled cries of the gulls. I was home by 3, and I vacuumed, washed the dishes, scrubbed the counters. I was 20 minutes early to pick up Xana, and while dinner was cooking, meatloaf with boiled potatoes in their skin and asparagus vinaigrette, I took her to the park and listened to her screech with baby joy as I held her in my lap and rocked higher and higher on the swings. When Clover came home, she was too tired to fight, and she accepted the meatloaf and the wine I'd picked out as the peace offerings they were. And after the baby was asleep, we listened to music, smoked a joint, and made love in a slow, deep plunge that was like paddling out on a wave of flesh for what seemed like hours. We took a drive up the coast on Saturday, and on Sunday afternoon, we went over to Tank's for lunch and saw how sad his apartment was with its brick and board bookcases, the faded band posters curling away from the walls, and the deep pile rug that was once off-white and was now just plain dirty. In the car on the way home, Clover said she never could understand people who treated their dog as if they'd given birth to it, and I shook my head, tolling it, but easily now, thankfully, and said I couldn't agree more. I woke on Monday before the alarm went off, and I was showered and shaved and in the car before my wife left for work. And when I pulled up in front of the long, windowless gray stucco edifice that housed Iron House Productions, I was so early, Radko himself hadn't showed up yet. I took off my watch and stuffed it deep in my pocket, letting the monotony of work drag me down till I was conscious of nothing, not my fingers at the keyboard or the image on the screen or the dialogue I was capturing frame by frozen frame. At some point, it must have been an hour in, 2 hours, I don't know, I became aware of the intense, gland-clenching aroma of vanilla chai, hot, spiced, blended, the very thing I wanted, caffeine to drive a stake into the boredom. Vanilla chai. Available at the coffee house down the street, but a real indulgence because of the cost. Usually I made do with the acidic black coffee and artificial creamer Radko provided on a stained cart set up against the back wall. I lifted my head to search out the aroma, and there was Jeannie, the secretary from the front office, holding a paperboard venti in one hand and a platter of what turned out to be homemade cannoli in the other. "What?" I said, thinking Radko had sent her to tell me he wanted to see me in his office. But she didn't say anything for a long, excruciating moment, her eyes full, her face white as a mask, and then she shoved the chai into my hand and set the tray down on the table beside me. "I am so sorry for your loss," she said, and then I felt her hand on my shoulder, and she was dipping forward in a typhoon of perfume to plant a lugubrious kiss just beneath my left ear. What can I say? I felt bad about the whole business, felt low and despicable, but I cracked the plastic lid and sipped the chai, and as if I weren't even conscious of what my fingers were doing, I started in on the cannoli, one by one, till the platter was bare. I was just sucking the last of the sugar from my fingertips when Steve Bartholomew, a guy of 30 or so who worked in special effects, a guy I barely knew, came up to me and without a word pressed a tin of butter cookies into my hand. "Hey," I said, addressing his retreating shoulders. "Thanks, man, thanks. It really means a lot." By noon, my desk was piled high with foodstuffs, sandwiches, sweets, a dry salami as long as my forearm, and at least a dozen gray-jacketed sympathy cards inscribed by one coworker or another. I wanted to hide, wanted to quit, wanted to go home, tear the phone out of the wall, get into bed, and never leave. But I didn't. I just sat there, trying to work, giving one person after another a zombie smile and my best impression of the 1,000-yard stare. Just before quitting time, Radko appeared, his face like an old paper bag left out in the rain. He was flanked by Joel Chanowski. I glanced up at them out of wary eyes, and in a flash of intuition, I realized how much I hated them both, how much I only wanted to jump to my feet like a cornered animal and punch them out, both of them. Radko said nothing. He just stood there gazing down at me, and then, after a moment, he pressed one hand to my shoulder in Slavic commiseration, turned and walked away. "Listen, man," Joel said, shifting his eyes away from mine. "We all wanted to, well, we got together, me and some of the others, and I know it isn't much, but..." I saw now that he was holding a plastic grocery sack in one hand. I knew what was in the sack. I tried to wave it away, but he thrust it at me, and I had no choice but to take it. Later, when I got home and the baby was in her high chair, smearing her face with cream of wheat, and I'd slipped the microwave pizza out of its box, I sat down and emptied the contents of the bag on the kitchen table. It was mainly cash, but there were maybe half a dozen checks, too. I saw one for $25, another for $50. The baby made one of those expressions of baby joy, sharp and sudden, as if the impulse had seized her before she could process it. It was 5:30, and the sinking sun was pasted over the windows. I sifted the bills through my hands, 10s and 20s, 5s, a lot of 5s, and surprisingly few singles, thinking how generous my co-workers were, how good and real and giving. But I was grieving all the same, grieving beyond any measure I could ever have imagined or contained. I was in the process of counting the money, thinking I'd give it back or donate it to some charity, when I heard Clover's key in the lock, and I swept it all back into the bag and tucked that bag in the deep recess under the sink where the water persistently dripped, and the old sponge there smelled of mold. The minute my wife left the next morning, I called Radko and told him I wasn't coming in. He didn't ask for an excuse, but I gave him one anyway. "The funeral," I said, "it's at 11 a.m., just family, very private, my wife's taking it hard." He made some sort of noise on the other end of the line, a sigh, a belch, the faintest cracking of his knuckles. "Tomorrow," I said, "I'll be in tomorrow without fail." And then my day began. But it wasn't like that first day, not at all. I didn't feel giddy, didn't feel liberated or even relieved. All I felt was regret and the cold drop of doom. I deposited the baby at Violetta's and went straight home to bed, wanting only to clear some space for myself and think things out. There was no way I could return the money. I wasn't that good an actor. And I couldn't spend it either, even to make up for the loss of pay. That would have been low, lower than anything I'd ever done. I thought of Clover then, how furious she'd be when she found out my pay had been docked. If it had been docked. There was still a chance Radko would let it slide, given the magnitude of my tragedy. A chance that he was human after all. A good chance. No, the only thing to do was bury the money someplace. I'd burn the checks first. I couldn't run the risk of anybody uncovering them. That would be a real disaster. Magnitude 10. Nobody could explain that. Though various scenarios were already suggesting themselves. A thief had stolen the bag from the glove box of my car. It had blown out the window on the freeway while I was on my way to the mortuary. The neighbor's pet macaque had come in through the open window and made off with it, wadding the checks and chewing up the money till it was just monkey feces now. Monkey feces, monkey feces. I found myself repeating the phrase over and over as if it were a prayer. It was a little past 9 when I had my first beer, and for the rest of the day till I had to pick up the baby, I never moved from the couch. I tried to gauge Clover's mood when she came in the door dressed like a lawyer in her gray herringbone jacket and matching skirt, her hair pinned up and her eyes in traffic mode. The place was a mess. I hadn't put on anything for dinner. The baby, asleep in her molded plastic carrier, gave off a stink you could smell all the way across the room. I looked up from my beer. I thought we'd go out tonight, I told her. My treat. And then, because I couldn't help myself, I added, I'm just trashed from work. She wasn't happy about it. I could see that. Lawyerly calculations transfiguring her face as she weighed the hassle of running up the boulevard with her husband and baby in tow before leaving for her 8 o'clock class. I watched her reach back to remove the clip from her hair and shake it loose. I guess, she said, but no Italian. She'd set down her briefcase in the entry hall where the phone was, and she put a thumb in her mouth a moment before she said, what about Chinese? She shrugged before I could. As long as it's quick, she said, I don't really care. I was about to agree with her, about to rise up out of the grip of the couch and do my best to minister to the baby and get us out the door en famille, when the phone rang. Clover answered. Hello? This is she. My right knee cracked as I stood, a reminder of the torn ACL I'd suffered in high school when I'd made the slightest miscalculation regarding the drop off the backside of a boulder while snowboarding at Mammoth. Jeannie, my wife said, her eyebrows lifting in 2 perfect arches. Yes, she said, yes, Jeannie, how are you? There was a long pause as Jeannie said what she was going to say, and then my wife said, oh no, there must be some mistake. The baby's fine. She's right here in her carrier, fast asleep. And her voice grew heartier, surprise and confusion riding the cusp of the joke. She could use a fresh diaper, judging from the smell of her, but that's her daddy's job, or it's going to be if we ever expect to. And then there was another pause, longer this time, and I watched my wife's gaze shift from the form of the sleeping baby in her terry cloth jumper to where I was standing beside the couch. Her eyes, in soft focus for the baby, hardened as they climbed from my shoe tops to my face where they rested like 2 balls of granite. It would be a long night, I could see that. There'd be no Chinese, no food of any kind. I found myself denying everything, telling her how scattered Jeannie was and how she must have mixed us up with the Lovitts. You remember Tony Lovett worked in SFX? Yeah, they just lost their baby, a little girl. Yeah, no, it was awful. I told her we'd all chipped in. Me too, I put in a 50 and that was excessive, I know it, but I felt I had to, because of the baby. Because what if it happened to us? I went on in that vein till I ran out of breath, and when I tried to be nonchalant about it and go to the refrigerator for another beer, she blocked my way. Where's the money? She said. We were 2 feet apart. I didn't like the look she was giving me because it spared nothing. I could have kept it up, could have said, what money? Injecting all the trampled innocence I could summon into my voice, but I didn't. I merely bent to the cabinet under the sink, extracted the white plastic bag, and handed it to her. She took it as if it were the bleeding corpse of our daughter. Or no, of our relationship that went back 3 years to the time when I was up on stage, gilded in light, my message elided under the hammer of the guitar and the thump of the bass. She didn't look inside. She just held my eyes. You know this is fraud, don't you? She said. A felony offense. They can lock you up for this. You know that? She wasn't asking a question. She was making a demand. And I wasn't about to answer her, because the baby was dead, and she was dead too. Radko was dead, Jeannie the secretary, whose last name I didn't even know, and Joel Chanowski and all the rest of them. Very slowly, button by button, I did up my shirt. Then I set my empty beer bottle down on the counter as carefully as if it were full to the lip, and went on out the door and into the night, looking for somebody I could tell all about it. Thank you. Thanks, Phil. Yeah, Ted is walking around with a microphone here, which we might not even need if I can repeat the question, if people just want to shout out. I'm happy to take your questions. You can have a minute to decompress from that, and we'll go for it. No math questions, please. Otherwise, anything you want. All right, I'll anticipate the first question. The red Converse, you have to get a new pair every 6 months because they wear out. My first pair, because I've always loved red shoes, came to me at the Chateau Marmont in 1995. I was sitting there for the book tour for Tortilla Curtain doing one interview after another. One guy came to the interview, and God forgive me, I don't remember his name. He was an Australian journalist, and he came sat at the table with me with a shoebox under his arm. He set it there, he said, "I think you might need this." What a saint. I did. It was my first pair of red Converse. Yes. No, I still teach at USC, even though I've been very fortunate for great people like you buying my books around the world. I don't have to do that if I don't want to. I love the idea of a liberal education. I went to SUNY Potsdam, the New York State school, the music school, to be a musician, to study music, but I flunked my audition, and so here I am. What am I going to do? I declared a history major, because I'd always loved history. Then in the course of that, we had to take an English course, and I discovered Flannery O'Connor and John Updike and so on. So I was a double major, history and English. And in my junior year, I blundered into a creative writing classroom, and that's when I discovered what I could do. Anything I've ever written, no matter how tight it might seem or how long, water music, whatever it is, it's just a story that begins with a voice, and I just follow it. I follow it over the course of days. A story like this might take maybe 2 weeks to in the actual writing, maybe a week of worrying first and thinking, and it might take a few days just to get the first paragraph. But once it starts, you lose yourself in it in an unconscious way, and it works itself out if you're lucky, and when it does, you feel great. So on my website, some of you may know, there's a little essay about this called "This Monkey, My Back," in which I liken this kind of thing to a drug addiction, to a drug high. When it comes together, you feel great, but then you want to do it again and again and again, which is why I only do fiction. I'm not interested in being a man of letters or giving lectures or writing essays or being a talking head on TV or anything like that. I just want to experience this high. I just want to see what's next. So, yes?
One really consistent characteristic of your characters is that they're all really nuts. But it all makes sense to them. As you read the character, everything seems to add up for them. It's all right, but they're nuts. Do you think the people that you're writing are exceptional in that way, or do you think everybody's nuts and thinks they're sane?
Yeah, a great comment. He points out that a characteristic that some of my characters share is that they're nuts, but from their point of view, they're sane. And he's wondering if I feel that these people are anomalies or everybody's like this. I think it's quite clear that everybody is exactly like this. And that's why people like these stories. Yeah. And I'm not even going to get into driving out on the freeways. I don't want to talk about that, or the people on their cell phone blocking the fast lane doing 45 miles an hour. I don't want to talk about them at all. Yes, way up in the back. Good question, but keep going on with the praise for half an hour. I like it. The question is, she was amazed at the insights of the Tortilla Curtain and the insights into Latino culture, and how do I do this and how do I know this? I think it's my job to try to enter into anybody in a deep way. Tolstoy was a count. He wasn't a peasant, but he sure could write from the point of view of peasants as well. We're all human beings, so I try to see a point of view of somebody else's point of view. A lot lately I've been writing from a female point of view, just because I didn't do that much early on in my career, and I just want to play with it and see what it is. In fact, the book I'm working on now is entirely from female points of view. Another one, yes. Right here. Oh, shucks. It's as easy as ordering a pizza. I just knock them right off. No, obviously, you can see they didn't have the term hyperactive when I was a child. We just had a back door, I am a nutball perfectionist. It's got to be just right. Everything you see of mine in print is almost exactly what I turned in to my editors, So I work it over very much. Each day just to get to work, I'm working over what I've done the day before over and over again to try to get into that spell of that unconscious spell. Sometimes you get there, sometimes you go backwards. But I do feel that I must persist in order to get it done. And I also never work on more than one thing at a time because everybody works differently. But from my point of view, if I were to hit the wall, you always hit the wall in a story because, particularly in the middle, is the most difficult because you've had a burst, you've set this material out, and as with your question, where's it going? And that is so difficult because you're now trying to get something that's not apparent. What are the themes? Why am I telling a story? Where is it going? How is the plot going to work out? What is the ending going to be? You don't know. And so you have to, I think, drive yourself, and it can be pretty miserable at times, Yes. Yes, I do. She's long-suffering. She has her rewards. She has her rewards, by the way. I do 100% of all work in our family. I do all the cooking, cleaning, buying things, paying bills, work, everything else. I do all that. She lies on the couch, and I rub her feet and give her bonbons to eat, that sort of thing. But she has to pay the price, especially when I'm working on a longer piece as I am now. Every day or so, I will read her what I have written that day to see how it's going along. And it's an odd thing. I love to read aloud, as you can see. My mother read to me. Our mothers, if we're lucky, read to us. And it's a great thing to have a story read to you. So I love to do it anyway. But it's a way of hearing the rhythms. The rhythms are very important to me, as you can see, the music of the language. So I can hear that. And also there's a strange refocusing of the brain. I may have just read it over myself a couple of times, the new stuff, but I don't get it in quite the way I do when I'm reading it aloud to her. And that enables me somehow to be able to figure out some of these questions of what is the plot, where is it going, what does it mean? And so I do that as frequently as I can. And she, sometimes she'll have a point of criticism, but basically, hey, she's a mother. We have 3 children. They need her, I need her too, So she's listening and she's there for me. Yes? I love this couple up here. They're both giving me all this praise. Yeah, keep going. You want to go on tour with me? San Francisco tomorrow. Well, thank you very much for saying that. The question is essentially, I'm not just doing a surface thing here with a book like Tortilla Curtain. And this one, by the way, is being compared to it a lot because I'm presenting an issue, which I told you about earlier, and I'm not taking sides exactly. I think you probably know how I feel about these things. But I don't think art is the place to make political statements. I'm just trying to open it up, broaden it, and create a work of art that you can enter and enjoy and interpret as you like. How I'm going deep and knowing about these things, I don't really know. I do some research. Of course, Spanish was the language I learned in high school in New York. I've been many times to Mexico and Latin America and so on. But really, none of the characters in Tortilla Curtain is anybody I know. It's just purely invented. I don't know how to explain it, except we're in an art gallery here. Artists make art, and you don't know exactly where it comes from. And if you make good art, it touches people in different ways. So let's have 2 more and we'll hang it up. Yes, right there. I've never done a sequel. This is not a sequel. It's not even a companion book. But when I was doing research for When the Killing's Done, I found a story, 2 stories that were very compelling, historical stories about the farthest island out, San Miguel. So I'm about 2/3 of the way through this novel. And again, it's all told from a female point of view of A straightforward historical narrative. I've never done anything like this before. No comedy, no black humor, just to see if I can do it. And so far, so good, except that people say, how often do you work? I work every day. But did I work today? No. Did I work yesterday? No, because I'm on this book tour, that's why. But when, I finished the second part in preparation before I left, and I'm mulling it over as I'm traveling, and one day in the distant future, I will finally get home again, clean up the mess my wife has left for me in the interval, and start working and finish this book. Okay, last question. I just do what comes natural. I'm the kind of writer who's not limited. I can write in any mode or any sort of thing. And again, as I said at the outset, I'm lucky in that if I want to discover something and it intrigues me, then I can research it, go there, write about it. I can look back and see how all these things are allied. You mentioned the Kinsey book. Don't read it, by the way, folks. It's 418 pages of pure sex. I see how it's allied to what I'm talking about. He called us the human animal. He's just the sex researcher. He said the poets have had 2,500 years to tell us about love. Now I, Alfred C. Kinsey, the scientist, would tell you about the human animal. That's what he called us. Isn't that touching? And how the human animal functions physiologically in the act of sex. And so this kind of fits in with all the things that I love to write about, our nature, our place in the world, our animal nature, and so on. So I guess I'm pre-selecting, but without really being conscious of it. So, thank you very much.